Kamar Taj, Kathmandu, Nepal, June 17, 2012. A mere 6 days had passed since I had managed to cast my first spell, and now we had finally gotten to a day I had been looking forward to ever since I first stepped foot in Kamar Taj. The day I learned how to use one of the most useful tools in a sorcerer's arsenal. When I exited out onto the rooftop courtyard that morning, one of the temple servants had been standing next to the entrance to the tower holding up a lacquered wooden board with gilded edges. But it wasn't the board that really captured my attention, rather it was the rectangular-shaped 2 finger rings neatly arranged upon its surface that Hammer was indicating for each of the novices to take. There was a feeling of great anticipation as I reached forward to take my own, the twin rings resizing to fit my smaller fingers the moment I slipped it onto my left hand. I felt the energy currents rearrange within my arm, forming a connection with the relic I had just donned, as I took my place among my fellow novices. Baron Mordo began to speak once the final novice donned their own ring and took their place. Mastery of the sling ring is essential to the mystic arts, Baron Mordo explained. They allow us to travel throughout the multiverse. All you need to do is focus. Visualize. See the destination in your mind. Look beyond the world in front of you. Imagine every detail. The clearer the picture, the quicker and easier the gateway will come. Producing his own sling ring that had been hanging from his right hip, Baron Mordo stood facing our group so that we could watch as he extended his arms with his hands held level with his shoulders, his sling ring firmly secured to the first 2 fingers of his left hand as he slowly began to trace a circle in the air with his right. Within moments a shower of angry orange sparks began to outline a circle in the air, and my fellow novices started to mutter amongst themselves as our view of Baron Mordo was replaced with the snow-covered side of a mountain, followed by the biting cold winds that threatened to steal the breath from our lungs. There was thankfully little time for us to enjoy the splendor of the view before the circle of sparks began to collapse in upon itself, allowing the portal to close as the final few embers fell to the ground, only to fade away themselves a few seconds later. The muttering voices of my fellow novices died down as the muggy heat of the valley slowly crept back in among us. Always keep in mind that the gateway you open allows travel in both directions, Baron Mordo cautioned us, through which the elements can move unimpeded. I hope I do not need to tell you what would happen if you were to open a gateway that led to the bottom of the ocean. I flinched, imagining the amount of damage that would cause, added to the fact that most sling ring portals were opened within feet of the caster. Has that happened before? One of the other novices asked him. There was a moment of silence as Baron Mordo glanced over to Master Hammer with a questioning look in his eyes. The elderly master had an uncharacteristically troubled look on his face, the knuckles on his right hand had turning white as he grasped the cloth that hid the scarred stump where his left hand had once been, as he gave his fellow master a small nod of acceptance. There was a similar incident, before my own time here, Baron Mordo said, turning back to face us. It happened during the summer of 1969, just a few short weeks after the Apollo moon landing, where Neil Armstrong became the first human to walk upon our moon. One of the students, a novice like yourselves by the name of Nicholas, had been inspired by the footage that he had seen on the television. When we handed out the sling rings for practice, he decided to open a gateway to the moon, ignoring the dangers of opening a gateway into the vacuum of space. Baron Mordo paused for a moment, unconsciously rubbing his thumb along the rectangular plate of his own sling ring as he stared off into nothing. A terrible wind started the moment the portal opened, as the weight of our atmosphere tried to fill a void that could not be filled, he continued. With nothing to hold on to, Nicholas was forced through the gateway, and sent tumbling along the lunar surface. Several of his fellow students attempted to help save him, laying down on the ground and grabbing hold of each other's legs so that their combined weight would keep them from being pulled through as well. They were nearly successful. Master Hammer closed his eyes, his shoulders slumped as if a great weight was pressing down upon them. The master who was in charge of them had cast a spell to help pull Nicholas back through the gateway, Baron Mordo explained. Meanwhile, the nearest student had gotten close enough to reach through the open gateway and grab onto one of his hands. Unfortunately, the gateway was no longer able to handle the stress after so much air had flowed through it, and it collapsed, leaving Nicholas on the other side, taking the other student's hand with him. And now I know how Master Hammer lost his hand, I realized as I wrapped my arms around myself to ward off the sudden chill that had crept up my spine. I had originally thought about trying to attempt opening a gateway into the Mass Effect universe in order to test if I could use the memories I had from the video game to properly visualize my destination, but after that rather morbid tale I understandably cautious once Baron Mordo started walking us through practicing with our own sling rings under the ever-watchful eyes of Master Hammer. Instead of trying to breach the barriers between dimensions on my very first attempt at opening a gateway, which in hindsight sounds like a horrible idea, I focused my mind on visualizing my bedroom there in Kamar Taj. Orange sparks began to dance in the air as I traced a circle in the air with my right hand, while making sure to hold my ring hand steady as I felt the currents of eldritch energy begin to flow within me once more. At first all that I accomplished was a furious shower of sparks framing my view of the side of the tower next to Master Hammer, before something seemed to click within my mind, and I found myself staring at the pile of books sitting upon the table within my bedroom, the flow of energy cutting off now that the gateway had been formed. "Very impressive, Laura," Mordo said, giving me a nod when I glanced over at him. There are few among us who were capable of successfully forming a gateway with a sling ring upon their first try. "Thank you," I said, giving him a respectful bow of my head. Now that I have gotten past the problem that I was having with channeling dimensional energies, I am finding it much easier to learn what you have been trying to teach me during my time here. I noticed, he nodded, turning to look through the gateway at my stack of books. "Use the rest of this morning practicing opening and closing gateways with your sling ring. Try to cut down the time it takes for them to form. Being able to quickly open a gateway may save more than just your own life someday." Upon giving me that cryptic remark, he left to go help the other novices that were struggling to open their own gateways, pausing to give praise to another student that had managed to open her own portal, this time to a beautiful beach with white sand. I took a moment to enjoy the warm breeze that blew in through her gateway, and returned the smile she aimed my way once Mordo moved on to help the next student. As the morning continued, I continued to practice forming my gateways as Baron Mordo had suggested, working on building the speed with which they formed, while at the same time practicing on changing their exact destination. While it makes sense to form both ends of the gateway so that you could walk through onto level ground, there was technically nothing stopping you from opening a portal at any angle. A prime example of this is when I reached through one of my gateways to grab an apple that I had left on the corner of my desk for an afternoon snack, before closing and reopening the portal so that the other end was facing down at my bed from just below the ceiling. Reaching my hand through the new gateway, I felt the shift in gravity in my hand as it changed from the brick-covered rooftop beneath my feet, and began to pull the apple towards the mattress that now stood in front of me as if it had been mounted to the wall. "And now you're thinking with portals," I thought to myself, and I couldn't help but grin as the memories of playing the portal games in my past life came back to me. When the class was over, Master Hammer stood next to the entrance to the tower, silently accepting the sling rings from the other novices as they passed by him on the way back in, returning them to the same lacquered wooden board a new servant was holding up for him. Only one other novice had managed to successfully open a gateway with that morning, that being the young woman who had spent her own morning wishing she was at the beach, and I could easily see the hesitation that she felt when she handed her own sling ring back to the elderly master. I was just about to step forward to hand my own ring over when I noticed Baron Mordo approaching me from behind, my sharp ears catching the soft sound of his boots on the brick ground moments before the wind shifted, carrying his scent. I turned around to face him, one hand still held up from where I was about to offer over my sling ring, while my other hand instinctively closed into a fist, the muscles that controlled my claws tensing within my forearm. "The Ancient One has requested that I bring you to her," Baron Mordo told me as he came to a stop just outside of arm's reach. "Very well," I nodded, turning back around to return my sling ring, only to find myself looking at Master Hammer's roped back as he made his way back inside, leaving me standing there holding my ring in the air. Don't I need to return?" "You don't need to worry about that," Baron Mordo interrupted. "Hold on to it for now, I'm sure it will come in handy in the future. Now come, follow me. We wouldn't want to keep the Ancient One waiting, would we?" No, definitely not," I agreed, turning to follow behind Baron Mordo. One of the main issues with the standard novice uniforms was a horrifying lack of pockets, which didn't leave me a lot of places I could put my precious sling ring. Several students had adapted by hanging pouches from their belts, but until now the only thing I could have really carried around would have been my cell phone, which never left my room since I didn't want to risk having my only source of contact with my family broken while I was sparring. Shrugging to myself, I tucked the sling ring under one of the straps of the sports bra I had on under my robes, deciding to deal with that issue later as Baron Mordo led me through the sunlit halls of Kamar Taj. I caught the familiar scent of the Ancient One, along with that of freshly brewed tea, as we approached the room where I had first met her. Baron Mordo stepped to the side and gestured for me to enter the room on my own, and I couldn't help but smile when I saw the Ancient One sitting at her table with a teapot at her elbow and 2 cups placed before her. "Ah, just in time for tea," the Ancient One told me, dismissing Baron Mordo with a slight nod. "Have a seat, Laura. We have much to discuss." Well, that wasn't ominous, I thought to myself as I sat down across from her, thanking her as she poured me a cup of tea. You've made great progress over the last several days, the Ancient One noted as she drizzled honey into her own teacup. You've read most of the books in the library that are available to novices, your movements are precise as you cast your spells during training, if a little unrefined. And, even though you had never used a sling ring before today, you spent most of this morning repeatedly opening gateways to your bedroom. The Ancient One gave a meaningful glance to where I had tucked my sling ring, and I tried to hide my faint blush behind the rim of my cup as I drank my tea. To be fair, I probably had been driving the librarian a bit mad with my repeated visits. There are 3 basic traits that are necessary to master the mystic arts, the Ancient One continued, stirring her tea with a spoon. First, one must be able to channel dimensional energies, which we ensured during your first morning here. Second, one must learn how to control the flow of these energies, shaping them into the form of spells, which you have shown an aptitude for over the last several days. And third, one must have the ability to visualize the effects of your spells, to anticipate the effect they will have on the world around us, and turn your expectations into reality. She waved her spoon in the air above her teacup in a weaving pattern, before setting the spoon aside and taking a sip of her own tea. Which you have shown with your swift mastery of the sling ring, the Ancient One pointed out. So tell me, Apprentice Laura Kinney, are you ready to learn how to turn your expectations into reality? I nearly choked on my tea when she called me by my new title, and my hands had a slight tremble in them as I carefully placed my teacup down on the table between us. Yes, Ancient One, I answered, looking her directly in the eyes to show my sincerity. I am ready to learn. There was a long moment of silence as the Ancient One examined me, and even with the limited experience I had so far I could literally feel her gaze examining the flow of energies within me, like a warm breeze blowing across the surface of a river. She then nodded to herself, and the sensation faded as she finished off her own cup of tea, the now empty cup joining mine. Then we had best get started, the Ancient One declared. Learning to heal and protect the mind is one of the most difficult disciplines to master, requiring a broad mastery of several other disciplines, as the mind forms the link between the physical and astral bodies. Therefore, as with all things, we shall start with the basics. With that, the Ancient One swung her arm to the side, sweeping her teacup over the edge of the table. I flinched at the sharp sound as the teacup broke against the hardwood floor, my eyes following the Ancient One as she got up from her chair and moved to stand over the shattered remains. I found myself worrying that I had somehow done something to upset her as she stared down at the sharp pieces of broken stoneware that lay there on the floor, less than a few feet away from her bare feet. I had just opened my mouth to say something when she started to form a small circular mandala by joining her hands at the wrist and twisting them as if they were holding an invisible ball, the orange lines of eldritch energy more refined than any I had yet seen during my time here in Kamar Taj. Once the mandala was formed, she separated her wrists, and placed her right hand behind the mandala. Bands of eldritch energy formed around her right forearm, and the mandala followed the movement of her hand as she waved it over the broken remains of the teacup. Something clicked within my mind, and I shot to my feet as the broken pieces of stoneware leapt through the air, becoming whole once more as the chair I had abandoned fell backwards with a loud clatter. The color had been all wrong, but that had looked almost exactly like the mandala that Dr. Strange had formed using the Eye of Agamotto when he used it to rewind time. What, but I stumbled over my own tongue. Every object carries with it an imprint of its own history, the Ancient One explained. The spell I have just shown you tapped into that imprint, allowing me to channel the energy needed to return the teacup to its unbroken state. So, you're saying you didn't just manipulate time without using the Eye of Agamotto? I asked her, my eyes still locked on the cup. Everything I just did fits within the natural order of things, the Ancient One told me. All of the pieces were there, all I had to do was apply the necessary energy to reverse their level of entropy. Psychometrics, I realized. But wait, hold on, if she could do this all along. Why didn't you use this to fix Jonathan Pangborn's back? I asked her. Couldn't you just use the memory of his back before it was broken, and put the pieces back together? Unfortunately not, for several reasons, the Ancient One answered, taking a moment to kneel down to retrieve her repaired teacup. There is a vast difference between the animate and the inanimate. The human body is constantly changing as cells divide, old cells die, and new cells take their place. There would be no way to return his body to its previous state, then the very matter that had formed his body was no longer there. Okay, yeah, that would be bad, I admitted. So, teacups, yeah. Teacups, the Ancient One agreed, handing the repaired teacup to me. Once you master the ability to repair inanimate objects, we can move on to teaching you how to heal the body. I have informed the other masters of your new rank. A new set of robes is waiting for you in your room, and the librarian has already set aside several books to get you started. Thank you, I said, bowing to her over the teacup. You are most welcome, the Ancient One replied. You are free to go now. I don't want to keep you from your studies. Yes, thank you, I said, bowing again. I was just about to turn around to leave when I looked down at the teacup in my hands, thinking about what all it represented to me. This, more than all of the fancy light shows, was the first tangible step towards being able to cure not only myself, but my sisters as well. Looking back up at the Ancient One, I saw her watching me with a knowing smile on her face. Can I have another hug? I asked. Very well, the Ancient One accepted. Yep, the verdict is in, her hugs are still awesome. That evening found me dressed in my new Crimson Apprentice robes as I sat in my bedroom staring at the stack of books the librarian had handed to me once I left my meeting with the Ancient One. I knew learning how to repair objects with magic wouldn't be easy, but the sheer number of volumes that had been written on the theory alone were a bit daunting. This wasn't something that I could just figure out in a single day, like I had managed with the sling ring. It was going to take a lot of time and effort, and a whole lot of studying. I was just about to crack open the first book on the stack when I heard my cell phone vibrate, indicating that I had received a new email. To Laura Kinney. From Sarah Kinney. Subject, Studies and Research. Hi, Laura. Sorry it took so long for me to get back to you. It's been an absolute nightmare trying to sort through all of these boxes so that I can get at least a semblance of order around here. Your sisters have been trying to help me as best they can, but even I don't know what I'm looking at half the time. I might have a doctorate, but I'm a geneticist, not a neurosurgeon. I'm sorry to rant at you like this. How are your studies going? You mentioned in your last email that you had made some kind of breakthrough. Keep up the good work. Love ya. Mom. To Sarah Kinney. From Laura Kinney. Subject, Studies and Research. Hi Mom. I should have figured that they would have information on a lot more than just what they did to me and my sisters. I'm sorry that you have to dig through all of that, and I know from personal experience that you will find a lot of unpleasant stuff in there. I do have some good news from my side of things though. So, after the breakthrough I had last week, they gave me a test today, and after passing it they've moved me on to the next stage of my training. Think of it like moving from undergraduate to university levels. Now that I have most of the basics down, I can start working towards a specialization. I still have a ways to go, but I'm one step closer to fixing what they did to our heads. You keep up the good work too. Love ya. Laura. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.